Hi there. Welcome to Bourbon Turntable. This is the show that blends the love of music with your love of whiskey. You got to love at least one of those or you wouldn't be here. And you ought to love both unless you're some sort of, pinko commie. Welcome to Bourbon Turntable. Thanks for joining us. Tonight, I've got part two of my conversation with Erik Wolfe of Stoll Wolfe out of Lidditz, Pennsylvania. If you saw last week, awesome. You're ready for this week. If you missed last week, go back and catch up. You missed out on some cool stuff. Erik's a fascinating guy, and he's doing some great things. But before we get to Erik, I want to tell you about the Bar Cart Co-op. Bar Cart Co-op is a collection of friends who produce content for the whiskey enthusiast. People like yourself, your friends, probably some of your neighbors, maybe even family members. Who knows? We got shows like Distiller's Talk with Alan Bishop and Christy Atkinson. Alan and Christy will talk with distillers from across the country and around the world about anything and everything in terms of distillation. Alan has a show called One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute also. You have a question about something with distillation? Ask Alan. He'll give you an answer. He'll post it on social media, and we can all hear his response to your question. He also has a show, If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. And this show has a bit of everything. The supernatural, religion, Bigfoot, UFOs, cool conspiracy theories, you name it. It is there, and Alan covers it, and it's pretty darn interesting stuff. Speaking of interesting stuff, My Whiskey Den with Pat and Mike and Mitch every Monday night, 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central. My Whiskey Den, where craft whiskey is king. Be sure to tune in to some fascinating tastings, some cool guests, and some awesome folks in the chat. David Levine is also with us through Whiskey in My Wedding Ring. Whiskey in My Wedding Ring, that is his podcast where he interviews distillers. He also has a blog where he will write reviews that are just top-notch, spot on. You can take them to the bank. Take them to the bank. Speaking of the bank a few shows with Bourbon Turntable by subscribing on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform. But let's go ahead and join part two of my conversation with Erik Wolfe of Stoll Wolfe Distillery.
And so my problem is too, being the age I am, I grew up adjacent to a lot of really good music, but then there was also those 80s bands. So some music, I freely have to admit, I don't know if it's good or nostalgia on my part.
Doesn't matter.
And that's the thing. I'm sure some of the, early Def Leppard, well, I guess it wasn't early Def Leppard, it was early to me, or
Right.
Poison, or some of the Motley Crue that, again, as a little kid or, 10-year-old, I look back on me singing those lyrics at 10 years of age to Dr. Feelgood or whatever, where I'm like, oh, that was interesting. But
Yeah.
That said, some of those songs just resonate only because they remind you of that time and that place, those liminal moments that we talked about before.
Yeah. There was had a band on as a guest a while back, and as I listened to their music, I thought, I get a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and I said, there's some Def Leppard in there, and I'm thinking, I hope they're not offended by that. And then I thought, wait a minute, these guys made billions of dollars selling out gigantic arenas around the world. If you're offended by being compared to Def Leppard, I don't know what to do for you.
That's exactly it. Yeah. No, it's so true. And I think with so much of that stuff, it's just amazing. I can tell you with certain songs, just like you did, where I was the first time I heard it, or what was happening the first time I heard it. And it's just, I don't have that with food necessarily, or with certain smells, or certain, I guess maybe certain smells are whiskey related stuff, but it's just amazing how music really has that power to transport you back to that place or time where you first heard it. And then it becomes almost inexorably intertwined with for better or worse too.
Right. United by purpose across time.
That's exactly. Yeah. Some songs are like the Kahlua of songs,
right,
where if I never had them again, I'd be okay with that. But
yeah, Huey Lewis, Power of Love. I mean, that was uh, the hit of that summer, and you couldn't get away from it. And I hear it, and I, I go back to group of friends I was running around with, and it's good.
Yeah, no, it's funny how some of that stuff too. Again, my wife is 7 years older than I am, so some of the songs that I will have that nostalgia for, she'll look at me like, "What?" And then she's like, "Oh, you were 11 at the time. That makes perfect sense. Now I get the sure playing with He-Man, listening to that makes perfect sense."
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Oh man. One of the things about Stoll Wolfe, it's to me, it's kind of synonymous with revival in a lot of ways, and what I mean by that is you brought back Dick Stoll out of retirement, and you're bringing Rose and Rye back, you're bringing Pennsylvania whiskey back, probably bringing sexy back too.
we do what we can.
Yeah, I know. But there's a lot of effort and commitment and integrity that's got to go into that, because you're in a lot of ways you're reviving history and you're preserving it and pushing it forward. Um, does that resonate at all with you? Is that on track?
No, thank you for saying so. For us, it truly is. So much of what we try to do is a mission of preservation. And then what some folks have said to us is that as creative people, you were drawn to this. Don't you find it somewhat stifling to only be able to do what had been done previously? And I think what we try to explain to a lot of people is so much of what we're trying to do, as you pointed out earlier, is help preserve the past through production in the present, but also keep it interesting for the future, or ultimately no one's going to care about the past.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the challenge with so much of the production is it's got to be, if you claim to have an interest in the past or that it's rooted in the past, it's got to have some authenticity, but it's also not being sold to consumers 200 years ago or 100 years ago. It's being sold to modern consumers who,
Right.
if you want the product to be a viable product, have to consume it and want to buy another bottle. It can't just be something they buy and put on a shelf.
Right.
So for us, it's been really exciting to see what we can do to look to the past to inspire the future. And one of the things that we've been really excited about is we have the opportunity to volunteer down at Mount Vernon, the reconstructed distillery run by Steve Bayshore down in DC and just outside of DC. And they do such amazing things. And part of the amazing thing that Steve does, including running the distillery and the mill, is bring in just this amazing cast of characters that work there that are all united around the same ethos, but have various skill sets, various background. So distillers, historians, millers, just whiskey experts, right? Fascinating groups of people.
Yeah.
But one of the things there was that I got to work with Alan Bishop, and as I think I mentioned before, he and I were rowing mash together down there, and it's all steamy. And again, it's those liminal moments where you're sort of straddling one century into another. And I said to Alan within like 2 minutes of us doing this, I was like, we've definitely done this before in another time or another place. And he's like, oh yeah, without a doubt. Pour faster, I think was then the next thing he said to me, something like that. So that familiarity immediately. But for us then to be able to work together at our distillery is really been such a joy and really so exciting and really helped me think about things in new and exciting ways. One of the things that Al and I had collaborated on was a recipe from a colonial distiller in this area. And one of the things that Alan had pointed out, and it's so true, there aren't many recorded historic mash bills from that time. There's a lot of people talking about what they did, and with some of them, you can infer what they were running based on the grain ledgers or the notes that they kept. But this gentleman actually had a written mash bill. So for us, it was really exciting to go back and sort of reinterpret that mash bill, figure out what we could do in the modern era, and then run it at Stoll Wolfe. So it's a wheated rye of all things, which particularly for that period is pretty fascinating, because part of the reason that they were giving the colonists land was so that they could grow crops to then be exported back to England, wheat being a very valuable export crop. So the fact that they were using wheat in this whiskey at that time is pretty fascinating. So at this point, we've had the opportunity to do 3 separate groups of runs, also playing with adding different yeast to the mash, and then working with one of the runs we put some apples in the thumper to approximate something that might have been done at that time. Another one we did raisins, another we did both. So we've got some distillate that's about 18 months now. Oh, fantastic. And remind me, I'll send you a sample that's been aging of that as well.
This is written. This is my favorite kind of stuff to get. It's just written on with a Sharpie, colonial rosin with apple.
So that was from one of the first runs we did with it. And again, just being able to work with Alan, so much fun. And just, it's funny because some folks were like, well, you guys are both such independent, creative people. How are you going to work together? And truly, like, hearing some of your favorite musicians collaborate together, yes, and was basically the uniting theme, where it's like, well, what do you think about this? Oh, awesome. And then what about that? Cool. And then what if we did and then I think at one point in the last run, Alan had asked me if I had added something or when I had added it, or just asked, he was like, well, do you think we could maybe add, I think it was some raisins I was like, well, I did that 2 days ago. Come on, why do you think we're working together? We're sharing a brain here, of course. So, and what's been fun as well then is sort of the other like-minded individuals we've been able to rope in. So in discussing that project at our visit to Mount Vernon this past year, we were introduced to a gentleman by the name of Paul Menta, who distills rum down at Key West Legal Rum, down in Key West, Florida. So Alan came out from Old Homestead, the distillery he's running right now, and Paul came up from Key West, and we did so interestingly, it's a hybrid rum that was run in the colonial era when they were playing with, right, 3 unholy guys in a very holy space there. So we were surprised, picture. No lightning bolts. We put Alan in the middle just in case. And that's a chapel down at Valley Forge. We were able to actually harvest some yeast for the project. Which was just another layer of cool to be able to be introduced to it. But with that, Paul had done some research, and Alan and I did some additional research, where what's fascinating is people always want to know when something changed in the world of history. When did people stop using steam or live fire and move to steam? Or when did they stop using copper pots and move to a column? Or when did the 3 chambers stop getting used? And the answer is, it depends. Where? Who? What day? So with so many of these things, it's been fun for us to explore. And with this rum, what happened was there were increasing tariffs and taxes on molasses, then on sugar. So as we all know, people aren't going to stop drinking. They're just going to look for new ways to craft an approximation of what they were drinking before. So because rum was so popular, the grain, and so much of the grain was being exported, one of the things that they looked at, and some of the founding fathers were involved, was looking at doing a hybrid of rum made of sugar, molasses, and or grain. So a lot of the grain that they talked about was corn. And what they were doing was they were taking unripened corn stalks and sort of squeezing them to get almost a unrefined corn sugar out of it. What they didn't realize, and they were really close to making it work, but their yields were terrible. What we've talked about is if they could have added some acid to it, they probably could have inverted some of the sugars and made it more fermentable, which again they weren't necessarily aware of at the time. So one of the things that Paul was talking about as a rum guy, talking to Alan and I as whiskey guys, was, well, what if we would essentially get chocolate in the peanut butter, or peanut butter in the chocolate, and see how that would play. So we had the opportunity to run that. I think the first one was in May, and then we did another one in just a couple weeks ago in June.
Yeah.
But really, really interesting product. Something that is really speaks to a specific time, specific place, and something that is automatically the best and worst iteration of it, only because it's the only version of it that I know that's in existence. Mm-hmm. So for us, it's really fun to just be able to allow people to taste it. And the most fun part is, as a distiller, I have enough people that are crazy enough to trust me that when I hand them an unmarked glass of something and say, try this, for the most part, they're willing to go on that journey.
Right.
And watching their face try to categorize what they're tasting. And again, to use music as the parallel again, I think one of the hardest things about music is that people want to stick it in categories.
Right.
And they want those categories to be these really neat boxes of, well, it's ska, or it's rock, or it's
right.
My favorite is alternative.
Right.
To what?
Right.
To music? And then once alternative became mainstream, it certainly wasn't alternative anymore.
Right.
But the name stuck.
It stuck.
So,
right.
Exactly. So I think with so much of that stuff, it's fascinating. And the most interesting thing to me with so much of that is the names never come out. The categories never exist for the first one or for the first two. Like when I've used this example to Alan before, but when Black Sabbath came out, how do you classify that?
Right.
What neat little box do they fit into? And now people have all kinds of stoner rock, or it was the birth of stoner rock, or it was
right.
part of heavy metal, or whatever group they wanted to fit into. That said, it's just always so cool when somebody is creating or recreating that synergy of influences that has yet to be sort of explored. And now the caveat to all that is it's got to work. Because if you put death metal and yodeling together, the only rule is it's just got to sound okay.
Right. Right. Well, like, to go back to the Beach Boys, okay, that's the beach sound, okay, that's surfer music. Well, guess what? Before then, there wasn't a category of surfer music.
And the best thing to me is that surf music was created by guys that never surfed.
Never surfed.
It's just, to me, that's so American in a certain way, where you're like, I'm not going to let that stand in my way.
So what?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Surf. I don't need to surf to make the music that everyone who surfs is going to listen to for 10 years. But
Right. I mean, people attribute the band Mother Love Bone for starting grunge. Well, when they played, they weren't singing, I think we'll call this sound grunge.
And it's funny because even with Kurt Cobain, he had said, and I hope I'm not mangling the quote too badly, but just, I'm doing a bad cover of the Pixies, and I can't believe no one's called us out on that. And the crazy thing is, Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've heard this before, but Smells Like Teen Spirit is more than a feeling.
Yeah.
No, but it is. I mean, he was jamming to More Than a Feeling, couldn't play it necessarily the way he wanted to, and that's how that song came about. And there's even instances of them playing More Than a Feeling, starting to play it, and going into Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Yeah.
Which is, and the other classic one they point to is Creep, is the Hollies' Air That I Breathe, Slow Down. Which is just, again, to me,
okay,
just so fascinating, where, again, good artists borrow, great artists steal.
Right.
Where if I say to you All Along the Watchtower, and don't lie, you think of Hendrix first, right?
Right.
So does everybody.
Right.
And like Dylan said, that's his song now.
Right.
Where you reinterpret something so uniquely and in such an amazing way that people are like, oh, it's that now.
Yeah. Well, and yes, good artists borrow, great artists steal. That's absolutely true, and I think that it's true with distillers as well. They'll find a technique that somebody's using or whatever, and they'll do it as well. But it's gonna be different.
That's exactly it.
It's gonna be different, and that's some of these people that guard their mash bills with their life. It's like nobody's gonna. You could tell everybody what that is. Guess what? It's not gonna taste the same. Not even close.
That's it. And to me, the free flow of an exchange of ideas, where sometimes in those situations, and I'm sure you've seen the documentary for Chuck Berry's 50th birthday, where he and Keith Richards are talking, and Keith Richards touches his guitar, and Chuck Berry punches Keith Richards for touching the guitar. Where sometimes it's like you just want to be Keith Richards, where it's like, man, I just wanted to see. I'm just such a huge fan that I just wanted to look at it. I'm not trying to. I wasn't going to steal your guitar. I wasn't going to break your guitar. I love what you do, and it'd be so amazing to. So I think with so much of that, and I know Alan and I talk about that quite a bit. Where I think when you're a creative person and you have so many ideas coming through, for better or worse, you're happy to share with other people, mostly because you're like, I just need to get these out because there's so stinking many of them, and I need to share them with somebody. And there's more coming through. It's not like that's the end of them.
Right. But at the same time, a lot of the things that I think you and Stoll Wolfe have done the heavy lifting on, revival of Rose and Rye, for example, the carrying on the legacy of Dick Stoll. I think sometimes it feels like there are others that, okay, you hit the triple, but they're saying they're on third base.
No, it's interesting. Well, and for us too, we always try to be so careful, where it's so hard when people put a flag in first, or they say we were the first legal distillery since Prohibition in a certain area, and for us, there are so many folks who are reviving other grains and working on rosin, and we're honored just to be a part of that first movement of them. And I think what's going to be so fascinating is seeing how these various heritage varietals exhibit terroir across different producers, and then also seeing how difference in production coaxes different things out of the grain. Where one of the fascinating things to me is the more distillers I speak with who are truly sharing and open and honest, the more you see that physics doesn't really change. The vapor path changes, but physics doesn't. So when we're at Mount Vernon, when Alan's at Old Homestead, when I'm at Stoll Wolfe, I'm still stripping at 100 proof. When I'm coming off the thumper, the second run, I'm still in the upper 120s, low 130s for my rye and bourbon. So again, vapor path changes. The way it's cooled changes. The way it's heated changes. But the physics aspect doesn't change. So I think with so much of that, it really does free you up, much like music, with scales, with different modes, with different, there's so much structure that it really, to some people, the structure is what keeps you from being creative. To me, the structure is what the rules that tell you where you can improvise. So with so many of those structures, it's like, oh, okay, it's got to be 51% or more rye. Great. It can't come off the still over 160. Can't go in the barrel over. Awesome.
Right.
Great. That tells me, oh, okay, so we could do all. That gives me 49% to play with.
Right.
In terms of mash bill, or that gives me. So I think with so much of the things that Alan and I have talked about, or Paul and I have talked about, or Aviana, or my dad and I, it's just there's so many amazing variations that you can play with. The hardest thing for a distillery of our size is that with about 2.5 to 3 barrels per production run, and only so much we run in a year, to come up with different variations and to be able to play, but then to also make sure that you're getting all your essentially homework done before you go
Mhm.
out and play.
Right.
So for us is a very exciting thing, but then also sometimes it's a challenge to say, oh, well, we can only produce this many days a year. We can only lay down this many barrels. So year over year, we've got a lot of things we want to play with, but it's going to take us, I think, the next, even if we didn't have more things to play with, we still have probably about a good 3 or 4 years of ideas to work through.
Right.
And the funny thing is when Alan calls or Paul call or text and my wife she's like, uh-oh, what are you guys gonna? So she's got a list of things that we can eventually play with. But Al and I were just talking the other night. There's just so many fun things to play with, and also just where does it stop? I mean,
Right.
from mash bill to cooperage to distillation style, and then also just mining some of the historical aspects where I'll say something that's a little crazy, but certainly not anathema and certainly not untrue, where through some incredibly generous people that we've come into contact with that have enabled us to try some older whiskeys and some pre-prohibition
Mhm.
stuff and some 150-year-old sort of Civil War era whiskeys,
Wow.
there was a very interesting and proud tradition of rectifying in America
Mhm.
that a lot of people romanticize, and some of the whiskeys are truly amazing, and the opportunity to try them is, I don't feel worthy most of the time. I'm just so blown away that I get included and have the opportunity. But what's amazing is how many of those flavors that, especially speaking to a large group of distillers, so it's not just one of us with one style or one type of
Mhm.
equipment, that you're like, that is not a flavor that occurs naturally in modern whiskey making.
Right.
And then you start to look at some of these older manuals, and there are mentions of customers expecting some type of rectification in a way. So I think the only reason I bring some of that up is the past is so fascinating in that, and to some people it's a letdown, but to me very reassuring. The past is nothing if not like the present, where it's occupied by humans living in what they consider a modern time, and they're competing in a crowded landscape, and they're trying to offer the best
Right.
tasting product at the economic most economically to people. So I think with a lot of these, you read some of these manuals, and customers didn't want whiskey that hadn't had a tiny bit of prune juice added to it, or a small amount of raisin brandy added to it, or
Mhm.
different things that were done, but it wasn't done in a way to be deceptive to the consumer,
Right.
and there were no laws against it at the time. So it was done really in a way to offer a better product. So again, for us, it's just so fun to revisit some of these techniques, revisit some of
Mhm.
these distillation methods, and also just see that it wasn't it wasn't an innocent past. It wasn't something where people were, oh, we're just farmers and we try to make whiskey and we don't really know what we're doing. These were incredibly skilled people. It was an
Right.
industry, and they were making the best whiskey they could at the time. Does that mean that it competes with the whiskey now? In some cases, absolutely. And some of the private reserve stuff is just, you throw it up into the air and it turns into sunshine. It's that, and it's hard to separate from the provenance also of how amazing it is. But with some of them, again, you taste it, and you're like, oh, this is truly a time capsule of what people's palates expected at that time. And it's
Right.
so fascinating because I do think there's sort of a modern belief that in the past things were simpler and purer and just in some ways better because of that. And in some ways I'm sure they were, but I think much like previous distillers of all generations that united by purpose across time, we're all trying to take again the best ingredients we can find and
Mhm.
make the most palatable spirit we can.
Right.
So I think that's certainly a commonality across so many generations, and one thing that really does unite so many of us. Um, but also, just the hardest thing is knowing that if I ran every day for the rest of my life, I still wouldn't be able to figure out all those nuances that are coming through and why in a particular batch you're getting more of a certain flavor, or and there are
Mhm.
ways of attempting to pinpoint it, but any good scientist will tell you you can only have one variable.
Mhm.
How do you do a distillation run with only one variable in a modern
Right.
craft distillery?
Right.
So it's truly so humbling and so exciting at the same time.
Yeah. Well, you're adding layers to your knowledge and experience, and those may be may feel like very thin layers at sometimes, but it's still adding. Even if something doesn't work, okay, now I know that doesn't work. Now, why didn't it work?
Well, and I think too, to be able to communicate that to some folks as well is fascinating. We have a very good friend who works with us down at Mount Vernon, who had the opportunity to brew beer out in Salisbury Plain, where Stonehenge is, and talk about a romantic vision of what brewing could have been, and for historical brewing, like what an unbelievably sort of evocative place to be able to, and we're speaking to him about how it was, and he's great. He's got this fantastic British accent, and it's like, Mark, well, what did you think of the? He's like, it was terrible. Like, we've learned things in the last few thousand years of, but just to be able to speak with someone who is honest about the history of it, and is able to communicate that to some folks, and again, the fact that you can taste something that people thousands of years ago were tasting, or at least even an approximation of it,
Mhm.
is in and of itself an amazing thing. Where to me, there's certain Hendrix songs, or even some of the albums that were released after his death, that some Pink Floyd albums that I have trouble listening to from beginning
Mhm.
to end. But conceptually, I understand that they are vital to so much of the other music I love, and that wouldn't
Right.
exist without them. So it's just so fascinating, some of the contributions along the way that are just so fertile for the folks that come after as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just to have that insight, good or bad, to know that, oh, okay, I can appreciate modern things more, or there's aspects of previous whiskey production that are so much better, or flavors that I didn't know existed,
Hmm.
is really just an amazing journey, to be able to experience.
Yeah. Let's talking about unique things and the flavors, and let's talk about rose and rye.
Sure.
This one is 106 proof, aged 31 months, and so what makes it different from the other rye varietals that you've used or that others have used, and why is its resurgence or resurrection important?
Well, and for us, it's been a very interesting journey, and something that we undertook happily, or were happy to join in on, but also something that in the back of our minds, we were like, well, yes, just as we were just discussing, consumers previously thought this was a great varietal and thought it made a great whiskey. What if modern consumers don't, or what if we somehow aren't able to coax that same flavor out of it?
Hmm.
So for us, it was a huge sigh of relief to find out that the Rosen does in fact have more rye-ness to it, if that makes sense, where it's got a little bit more sweetness, a little bit more spice, and definitely more floral notes to
Hmm.
it than our standard rye. And I don't, the hard part in speaking about the Rosen is that I years and years and years ago, I used to help come up with sponsorships, and no one ever wants to buy the silver sponsorship. It's got to start at gold and
Hmm.
then go to platinum and then like double gold and double. So for us talking about the Rosen, we don't, it almost sounds like our standard rye is lackluster, where we think it is very exciting and very drinkable. But with the Rosen, it's that same flavor profile, but it's more intense. Is really what we've experienced. And to some folks who are interested in rye, but sometimes the spice of the rye is a little overwhelming for them.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Rosen is probably too much spice for them, where our standard is probably a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more approachable for a first time rye drinker. That said, we've had people drink the Rosen out of curiosity as their first rye, and we're like, "You've now ruined me on rye because
Right.
what do we do now?" And the interesting thing with the Rosen thus far is, as always, we've kind of done things our own way, which has sort of annoyed some people in that I got messages before. So the rye that you're drinking now was supposed to be released earlier as, what was it, like just over 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't ready. It was
Yeah.
drinking really, really nicely, approaching that point, and then it just went to a weird spot. So we decided to use another barrel.
Mm-hmm.
And then with the other one we released, it was close to bottled in bond, was over 4 years, but not that the proof was like 102, 104. So people ask, well, why didn't that occur to you that, yes, it did occur to us that we could do that. It just, we proofed it down to 100 and it didn't drink as well. So
Yeah.
for us, being a very small family owned and operated distillery certainly has its challenges. But
Mm-hmm.
one of the benefits is it's a 3-person meeting where I ask my wife and my dad, hey, what do you guys think? Yeah. Okay, cool. We're going to do it that
Yeah.
way. So
Yeah.
for us, we really do have the opportunity to kind of be more flexible with those things. And then also crazy enough to be like, you know what? There is no real standard age release on the Rosen right now. There is no standard proof. And part of that is by design, where
Mm-hmm.
if we would just lock in and say, okay, we do 90 proof for our standard releases, so we're going to do 90 on the Rosen. We arrived at the 90 on our standard releases based on Dick's decades of experience.
Right.
So with the Rosen, for us, we're still playing with where that sweet spot's going to be. And I think the reality is ultimately, much like our regular rye, will have an older and younger expression. And for that, the main reason with both of those is that some people prefer to taste more of the grain and some people prefer to taste more barrel characteristic. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a large part of the American whiskey consumers out there that do feel like the things that you and I associate with barrel characteristic are qualities that a good whiskey possesses. And I think there's other folks out there that really feel like the grain should still be showing through in some way and
Right.
really get excited about that aspect. So I think for us to be able to have both aspects is really something that we understand and to us is something that we plan to continue to do.
Yeah. 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 The first time I drank it, the note I wrote down was floral, and it is, but it's not like an overwhelming smack in the face floral, but it's definitely floral. And there's almost like they're gin botanicals on the nose, not juniper necessarily, but it noses a little bit like a gin to me.
No, that's a great observation. Well, and for us too, it's I'm trying to remember what Lisa had said the first time she tried it. Something like rye rolled in sugar and was it lavender maybe or lilac, or I forget exactly what but and that's the fascinating thing for us too, is just how it drinks a different proof. And the most challenging thing for us at this point is people ask us how the Rosen tastes compared to our regular rye. And one of the things that we do point out is that we've only released, I think to date, 4, maybe 5 barrels of Rosen. I don't think it's been that many. But for us, we can see sort of trends, but it's amazing to see how different some of those barrels have been, and how, again, the defining characteristic across all of them has been a more intense flavor experience than than our standard release. But we're really excited to see what 5, 6 year Rosen tastes like as well.
Yeah.
And again, to some folks, that's sort of getting further away in the wrong direction. We actually had some folks, again, there's always contrarians out there. We had some folks that were disappointed in the older rye because they felt like the younger rye was more vibrant and less that the barrel in some way had tamed it a little bit. So again, I think part of what we're seeing with that is Scotch drinkers who are matriculating to rye, wanting to see a little bit more boldness and youth in the rye, which they associate, I think, with some of the phenols in the Scotch. Oddly enough.
Okay. No, this is fantastic.
Thank you so much.
And I've only had, this is my second glass of this, and the first one I opened, I did the, you got to get rid of the neck pour, so
right.
So I poured it and then I drank it, and it was very good. This one I poured, I don't know, probably 45 minutes, hour ago, and it's been sitting in the glass. It just opens up so much.
I'm so glad to hear
letting it sit.
You say that you let it sit like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know that I'll have the discipline to always do that, but tonight, just out of necessity, it did, and it just is. There's more richness. There's more depth to it. The notes are basically the same that they were when I tried it the first time, but there's just more to it. If that makes any sense at all.
No, I think so. Sorry for talking. I got so excited by what you were saying. I started to talk over you there earlier. Sorry about that. But no, I think what you're saying is so true. And I think of it sometimes. Again, we make so many comparisons to music in our distillery, but in some ways it's like the gain has sort of been turned up on the flavor profile, where just the peaks are a little bit higher, valleys a little bit lower. And just, I think I can't advocate to people enough that there's so much care that goes into making the whiskey. It sits in barrels for years and years and years. And typically, and I'm guilty of this as well, as an American, you don't pour something unless you want to drink it. But please, if people can let it sit for a little while like you did, it's amazing how the experience changes once it does open up for all whiskeys, not just ours. But it really does allow some of that to come through. But to your point, I think even a little bit of toffee in the background, sort of giving a backbone to some of those other spices as well. But we're pretty excited about how they're drinking, and for us at 106 proof, I think it's essentially where it's coming out of the barrel. We do add, I would say, on a typical 53 gallon barrel, we're getting about 48 gallons or so out of there with Angel Share in that time. And to that entire 48 gallons, we're adding about a quarter cup of water, and slowly, just because we're obsessive that way. But basically, that's just to open it slightly, just to help open that flavor profile a little bit. So it's pretty much what with a very light filtration, just to remove char. We never chill filter. So you're essentially getting out of the barrel what we're pulling out. So
yeah, really good stuff. Congratulations. So what came first? Was it the plan, the Seed Spark project plan to bring back Rosen Rye, or did you start the distillery first and then the Rosen Rye project just came about after?
So I would say they were fairly simultaneous. That said, the best way, in my experience, to make God laugh is to announce an opening date for a distillery. So it's something that Laura Fields had spoke to Dick Stoll about. Laura Patrizio from the Seed Spark Project, Delaware Fields Foundation. So she was speaking to Dick around the time we started talking about opening the distillery, and we had hoped to have the distillery open years earlier than we did. Of course, with that, we were very fortunate in that we set out to get investors. Thankfully, the world did not want to invest in someone who'd never distilled before on a commercial scale with someone who they felt was too old to go back to distilling, which for us worked out really well in that we don't have investors. So nobody's breathing down our neck saying, look, you have to release this. We don't care because you got to make these payments. So for us, thank God for unanswered prayers. But that said, with the distillery, it 5 years, I believe, of replanting the seed from I think it was 3 ounces to get it to basically enough to make a batch of whiskey from. And in retrospect, again, thank God for what you don't know, but we invited people in to watch this rosin be distilled while we were still working out some of the gremlins in the distillery.
Right.
So I've got Steve Bayshore from Mount Vernon there. I've got Lisa Roper Wicker there. I've got, Laura Patrizio there. I've got all these amazing people there that I don't want to think that I'm an idiot, especially Dick Stoll. And again, media's there, all these other people. But I was like, why? What was I thinking to invite these people in until I have every detail worked out with every pump and it? But thank God, by the grace of God, it worked out well. And then for us to be able to then start growing the rye on the family farm was really huge. We started with, I think it was just under an acre. We're up to just over 7 acres now.
Wow.
Close to 7.5 acres. So it's really truly when they talk about plowing the seed back in or reinvesting the seed, that's really how intensive it was, and the kind of thing where we were blessed that someone like Laura had the foresight and that Dick also realized how important her efforts were, because it's the kind of thing that with opening the distillery, we were so busy and so just trying to take care of so many other things that if that also was on our plate, I just don't see how it would have happened. Yeah. And there were so many folks. There was the Penn State Ag Extension, Greg Roth, Mark Antle, a bunch of other folks in there that we're truly standing on the shoulders of giants that we even have the ability to do it. And the fact that Dick Stoll was the last person to distill it and then the first person to distill it again. There's very few things that seem like poetic justice, particularly in some of the commercial world. That was one of the few that to me just seemed like it was meant to be that way.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. Erik, I've kept you for a while here, and man, it's been so good to catch up and to talk with you and enjoy some of your whiskey and hear all the great things you've got going on. Everything that I've tried from you, it is a unique experience, but it's also absolutely fantastic. And I'm just looking forward to what all you've got going down the road.
Oh, thank you so much for the chance to be on and to talk. For us to be able to talk whiskey is truly such a pleasure. And then to be able to talk about whiskey and music is, I'm thankful that you took the time to be able to, this is just, and also that my wife didn't have to talk about these things for an hour and a half. You have no idea. You may have saved my life. Just that she got that break from whiskey and music. So thank you.
Good. Well, you can tell your wife you're welcome. All right. Well, Erik, thank you very much. We'll get you back on here sometime. Maybe get Alan with you and talk about some of the Colonial Rye, Colonial Rum projects you've got. So that'll be a lot of fun.
Oh, that would be fantastic. I look forward to it.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
You too.